Welcome. This is the Global Summit House podcast. Catch power interviews and discussions with influential, inspiring, and powerful people. Explore what's possible by tuning into this podcast with our all-new The Writers Project episodes, featuring one of the world's most inspired thinkers and writers. Visit our website at www.globalsummithouse.com.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sharika Alford here to play another episode of our podcast today. And we're here with Frank Daversa, the author of Spirituality in the 21st Century. And he's going to tell us a bit about his book. Thank you so much for joining us today, Frank.
Thank you for having me, Sharika.
Yes. So before we jump in about the book, would you give us a brief background about yourself and let us know how you got started writing?
Well, I was raised in the town of South Hempstead, New York. It was during my college years that I honed my writing skills. I earned my associate's degree in 1981 with honors. 2 years after earning my bachelor's degree in 1986, I moved to Houston, Texas. I worked 14 years in the corporate world before becoming a writer in 2007. I published my first web article on spirituality in 2008, and my first book, Young Adolf, An Alternate History, in 2011. I published my second book, Politics in America, A Guide to the Two-Party System, in 2012. I've been on a spiritual journey since contracting a serious illness in 1997, which inspired me to write my latest book, Spirituality in the 21st Century.
Oh, wow. So
back in 2000.
Okay. So your illness is
I got started one day back in 2007. I was thinking about spirituality, and the concepts of spiritual paths and forging people's lives came to mind. As I alluded to previously, I sat down and composed a 2-paragraph article about these and other topics. I showed it to several people and got a positive response. I thought more about it and composed a 3rd paragraph about types of learning. I wanted to appeal to a wider audience, so I created a website for the article. It no longer exists. I solicited readers from anywhere and everywhere to read and provide me with feedback. I made countless revisions to it before all was said and done. After almost 3 years of this, I finally decided to sit down and compose a book about the subject. It took me approximately 2 weeks to come up with a rough draft. It took the next 11 years to fully develop and finalize it. For the record, the article is reprinted in entirety in chapter 1 of my book.
Wow. Okay. So who is your target audience for spirituality in the 21st century?
Progressive-minded adults 18 years and older who are not devoutly religious. More importantly, it is intended for all those who yearn for a meaning in their lives and a vision with which to achieve it. I wanted to provide insight into spirituality and life, which I learned through growing up.
And when and where does your story take place? I know it's about spirituality, but kind of when and where within your book?
Well, simply the present day in contemporary society.
Okay, so I guess you have quite a few thoughts over various topics such as gun reform in your book. What are your views on that subject?
Too many lives are needlessly lost to gun violence. Gun reform is an absolute travesty in this country. Mass shootings keep happening, but Congress does nothing to stop them. The paralysis in Washington is forced down to one single factor: the NRA's control of Republicans. As long as that situation persists, progress will be difficult. People have to share responsibility for changing the status quo, and that they need to vote congressmen who fail to act out of office. To realize meaningful gun reform, three things must happen. First, we need universal background checks on all gun purchases. Second, we need to ban military-style assault rifles. Third, we need to ban high-capacity magazine clips. Such measures are not going to stop all shootings, but they represent an important step in the right direction. Prayers are nice, but we need real action.
Oh, wow. Okay. And with those thoughts, in addition to your thought about gun reform, and as far as politics are concerned, what's your main focus as far as politics in your book?
I have identified a pattern of change involving politics. It concerns the development of public freedoms. I believe God allows a particular party to come into power when he wants to grant certain rights to us. When we reach a point at which we begin taking these rights for granted, he allows the other party to come into power to effectively take them away, until such time as we are willing to fight for them again. Low voter turnout is a classic example of this. The right to vote is fundamental to our democracy. Voter apathy severely diminishes that right. That's why key provisions of the Voting Rights Act were struck down by the Supreme Court in 2013. The law will remain that way until such time as we fully respect the right to vote again. As long as we behave this way, there will always be a viable opposition party. This is part of the cycle of life. That's why history often repeats itself. It's God's way of teaching us a lesson over and over again until we get it right. It's all part of God's plan. We voted in high numbers this past election, which is why Joe Biden was elected president. He will help reverse the damage done by the Trump administration. So what is the moral to the story? Treasure your rights, or else you run the risk of losing them. As you can tell, my view towards politics has evolved since writing my second book.
Yes. And speaking of that, how would you introduce your book to a friend? Like, if you were telling them about it, how would you introduce your book to a friend in 1 or 2 sentences?
Spirituality in the 21st century enhances your understanding of spirituality, life, and the world. It guides you through the growth process, providing key insights along the way. It is designed to benefit most any spiritual journey.
Okay. And were there like certain parts that you found challenging when you were writing this book? What was the most challenging part during your writing experience?
Chapter 6, Achieving Enlightenment, was the most challenging one to write. It is detailed, and I wanted to get it just right. Chapter 8, Wants versus Needs, was the easiest. I have been practicing those principles my whole life.
And are there any other themes or concepts that you would like to highlight during this interview?
First, I contend there are 5 fundamental principles necessary for achieving spiritual enlightenment. Follow them closely along with the rest of the book, and you should realize it in your lifetime. Second, there are 5 C's that make relationship work. Adhere to them closely and you'll see it grow. Third, there are 3 important lessons the earth needs to learn in the 21st century. The planet needs to support measures that actively address these lessons more fully.
Okay, so now you mentioned about making relationships work. What specifically are some of your thoughts about how to make those work from your book?
Many factors go into making a good relationship. Love, trust, dedication, sincerity, and romance, as well as what I call the 5 C's. Compatibility, a strong personal interaction. Communication, the ability to discuss the positive and negative aspects of a relationship in a constructive manner. Compassion, an emotional bond toward the other person. Commitment, a dedication to the success of a relationship. And compromise, the ability to negotiate differences fairly and amicably. Romantically speaking, it's natural that no 2 people are the same, so at some point there are going to be differences. This is where good communication plays an important role. If you can't successfully resolve disputes, the relationship has a limited future, no matter how beneficial the good attributes of either partner are. Communication contributes towards building an understanding and trust between the two parties, which, combined with the other four C's, helps build a distinct and healthy affection that can last a lifetime. If the bond of love between two partners is strong, the relationship can lead to marriage. But if your prospective partner is unable to follow the 5 C's, then he or she may not be ready for a serious relationship. One thing you don't want to do is rush into marriage.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I think we could all use a book just on that subject alone. Is there an excerpt or any part of your book that you would like to share with the listeners today?
Sure. It is taken from chapter 13. It is a bridge for succinctness. Of all the problems that exist in the world today, there is one that's so pervasive it touches almost everyone in one way or another. It has been around since the dawn of humanity. Wars have been fought because of it. It is handed down from generation to generation. It manifests itself on both an individual and societal level. This problem is intolerance. Intolerance is the unyielding adherence to one's opinions or prejudices, regardless of how damaging they may be. Tolerance, on the other hand, is the act of acceptance, the measure of a person's ability to effectively deal with difficulty. The question is, do we want to live life full of happiness or hostility? Our society is filled with intolerance against minorities, LGBT individuals, illegal immigrants, and others. For example, blacks have been disenfranchised and underprivileged throughout history, including the present. They are often unfairly targeted by law enforcement. Are we going to merely accept such practices or challenge them and become better citizens as a result? There is no room for complacency in this regard. We cannot rest on our laurels and take for granted accomplishments made by previous generations. We conquered many forms of prejudice following the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement, but our work is not done. Unfortunately, we need to ask ourselves, does there need to be more or less intolerance in God's universe? The only rational and humane answer to that question is more.
See, wow. Now, you address quite a few controversial topics in your book. What type of feedback have you received from those who have read it?
It's been mostly positive. I've had many favorable reviews of the book. One critique I got is that it could have been a little longer, but I wanted it to be an overview of spirituality. I didn't want to weigh the reader down too much detail. I wanted it to be a smooth read.
Okay. How can people learn more about you and your book? Do you have a website or social media, or how can they find out more about you?
They can visit my website. Just fill out my name, www.frankdaversa.biz. That's FRANK, D as in David, A, V as in Victor, ERSA.biz. There they will find more information about my book along with links to purchase it from Amazon.
That's amazing. Well, folks, if you're just now joining us, I've been speaking with Frank Daversa, and he has been sharing with us about his book, Spirituality in the 21st Century. And if you would like to learn more about Frank and his book, you can visit his site at www.frankdaversa. That's Frank, FRANKDAVERSA.biz. And that's going to conclude our interview today. And thank you so much for joining us, Frank.
Thank you very much for having me.
You have a great day. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us with our writer today, Frank Daversa. Please be sure to check out his book and subscribe, like, and share. Have a great day.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Global Summit House podcast. Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Podbean, iHeartRadio, iTunes, or Google Play. Connect with us at globalsummithouse.com. See you on the next episode.